Welcome to Tea, Tales, and Talks, where we talk about spooky things, drink some tea, and try not to get too scared. I'm Sarah, I'll be your host.
And I'm Mackenzie, I'll be your co-host.
For these strange and occasionally unsettling tales.
If you like spooky stuff, history, ghosts, ghouls, witches, and mysteries of this world and others, then Tea, Tales, and Talks might be the podcast for you. Join us for all the paranormal tea, haunted tales, and spooky talks. New episodes drop every Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
Until we meet again, our twitchy witchy friends, stay spooky and
don't let your tea get cold.
Research and recording of Canadian creepies happens on the shared land and traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. A key treaty governing this territory is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. This treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee people binds them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, meaning we must take care of the land and the creatures we share it with.
Welcome, wanderers, to journey down the crooked path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
Spiders can be creepy, especially when you think about all the places that they can hide and squeeze into. That corner above the doorframe, a gap behind a stack of firewood, a place your shoulder brushes past without thinking. And then you've got the bugs that don't even wait for you to find them, the ones that go straight for the skin, black flies that treat June like a buffet, mosquitoes that show up the second the air warms, deer flies that don't care how fast you move. Canada has all of these. Basements that never warm up, wood piles that stay exactly where you drop them, trails where a single strand across your face can ruin the rest of your walk. And sure, we've talked about giant worms on the pod, but spiders get people in a way that worms never do. Worms are only a problem when they're big enough to block a trail, but spiders are a problem because they don't need to be big at all. They just need a place to sit where you can't see them until you're already underneath. On February 8, 1913, a prospector named Poolfield sat in his cabin on the Ross River and typed out a letter to his friend Jack Moran. Moran worked as an inspector for the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, and Field would send him letters whenever he felt like it. Sometimes years would go in between the letters, and he would fill them with whatever he had been doing out on the Mackenzie Mountain with the mountain indigenous tribes, the Dene group that lived off of moose, mountain sheep, caribou, and black bear. Field would write about hunting mishaps, fights between the bands, and the things their medicine men did. Mixed in with all of that were creatures that the mountain indigenous tribes said lived in the high country. In this particular letter, one line kind of stood out from the rest. It said, quote, "They have tails of enormous animals, such as the mammoth, and spiders as large as full-sized grizzly bears, and long worms that are supposed to be alive today. And nobody can save them from these animals but their doctors. Some of these Indians will tell you that they have seen these animals." Now, belief in living mammoths shows up all over northern Canada, from the forest up top to the rough country of the Shield. But there's something about the idea of giant bugs that kind of hits a nerve. Most of us don't need much imagination to picture how fast we'd leave the room if we saw one. And this is where the giant bug stuff starts. And the first stop is with the Inuit stories. They have accounts of huge man-eating spiders said to live out on the tundra and up in the mountains around the Arctic archipelago. Neil Christopher and Mike Austin put a couple of these stories into their 2014 book, The Hidden, which is packed with creatures from Inuit oral history. One of them is the Ossivak. She's described as a woman who isn't really a woman at all. An Inuit hunter told Christopher that he ran into her while he was out after caribou along the Cumberland Sound, on the southeast side of Baffin Island. He said he came across a house, looked through the windows, and saw a large woman inside working on caribou skin, and he went in. Christopher wrote that the Ossivak walked right up to him, and he cut off her head out of fear. Her body shrank until it was a spider. The man bolted out of the house, looked back through the window, and saw her inside again, doing the exact same thing with the caribou skin. So he left. She ran out after him and yelled for him to come back, but he kept going, and later he told people what happened. Christopher included another creature with a similar name, the Ossivalut. This one was described as a huge spider that lives in the Arctic Ocean. It sits just around the surface and grabs whatever comes close enough, whether that's a seal or a walrus or someone in a kayak. An Icelandic Inuit told Christopher that he was almost taken by this creature while he was out on the water. Christopher said that the man noticed that the bottom of the water was coming up close to him. Quote, "At a place where no shell has ever known to exist." He noticed at the bottom quite close to him, and then he suddenly recalled having heard of old people talking of the ocean spider, a most dangerous animal to kayakers. The man saw a large eye, and then another one about a paddle's length away. When he pulled away, a wide gap opened up behind him. He said a less skilled kayaker would have never made it out. The idea of predatory spiders appears in the Danias stories as well. Their territory runs along the north side of the Peace River in northwestern Alberta. In 1976, the anthropologist Robin Ridington wrote that the Danesa described a huge spider hunting people in the distant past. They were said to make this whirling sound by spinning a piece of wood on a line of spider silk. Anyone who followed that sound into the mountains didn't make it back. The spiders would drop on them and drain them, completely sucking them of their body fluids. A story about sky-dwelling spider also appears in the Flathead, the interior Salish nation whose territories extend into what is now northwestern Montana and the boundary country of southeastern British Columbia. In 1865, Captain Charles William Wilson recorded one of their stories while reporting on the nations living along the borders between the Rockies and the Pacific. He wrote that the Flathead described spiders who lived in the sky. They were said to look like old men with gray hair, beards, and long hooked nails. They hunted wolves, deer, and large dragonflies, among other animals, by catching them in their webs and killing them with darts. Canadian stories have had a fascination with giant bugs and spiders. In fact, outside of the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa stands Maman, a large spider sculpture by Louise Borges made from bronze, stainless steel, and marble. She had created the spider as a tribute to her mother, describing the spider as clever and protective and steadfast, a symbol of care and strength. Now, man-eating spiders aren't the only bug-like creatures in Indigenous stories across Canada. In southern British Columbia, from the coast to the Rockies, there are old accounts about a figure who stole children. Sometimes she's described as an ogress. Sometimes she's described as a giant owl. Either way, she took children and she ate them. One of the children that she tried to take managed to turn the tables and burn her in her own cook fire. The sparks that came off her body turned into small animals. Now, depending who's telling this story, they became birds, lice, or mosquitoes. And the mosquitoes were said to have kept the same appetite that she had. A thirst for blood.
You. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived Every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Ni-ki-na-gana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Ni-ki-na-gana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit PayYourRent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
Now, most of these stories sit in the coast or the interior Salish territory, but a related one appears with the Wuk-ki-nukvi, those whose homeland sits among the coast between Bella Bella and the north end of Vancouver Island. In 1982, Chief Simon Walkus Sr. told a story in his language to folklorist Susan Story Hilton, and a translated transcription ended up in the Canadian Ethnology Service publication. Chief Walkus had said that there was once a village on the Nachansi River near the First Narrows on Owikino Lake. Downriver from it was a place where blood-red smoke rose from the banks. That was a spot said to be home of a cannibal spirit called Baxbax Willenuksui. The spirit, whose name translates to the man-eater at the north end of the world, was said to be a bear-like monster whose body is covered with these horrible, ravenous, gaping mouths. Editor Susan Halton and John C. Rath added in a note that this spirit lived on human blood. The chief's stories tells of a group of young brothers who went to the place of the river where the red smoke rose up from the banks. There, they found the cannibal spirit's house, went inside, and met its son. The father was out hunting. The son noticed that one of the brothers had a scrape on his chin and demanded the blood. The brothers quickly realized that they had made a bad choice. They tricked the spirit, got out, and ran back to their village. When the cannibal spirit returned and heard about what happened, he followed the brothers upriver and went into the house where they were hiding. Their father was already there and greeted him, offered to make a meal. Now, this guy was a skilled carver, so he shaped cedar into arms and legs and pretended that they were his son's limbs. He threw the wood into a pit of hot water and said he was cooking it. While they waited, he told the spirit an old story. The spirit fell asleep, and then the father rolled him into the boiling water and killed him. Just to be safe, he cut the body apart, and each piece turned into a mosquito, which Chief Walkus called the small ones that bite. We also encounter stories of giant mosquitoes from the Huron and the Petun, who later formed the Wyandot Nation. In 1888, ethnologist Horatio Hale published a creation story from them that included a quick mention of oversized mosquitoes. In that story, the world was nothing but water, and the only beings around were the animals and the birds living on it. A pregnant woman fell out of the sky after her husband pushed her through a hole above. The animals caught her and brought up bits of the earth from the bottom of the sea. They spread the soil across the back of a huge turtle so she had somewhere to stand. Eventually, this woman gives birth to twins. One was described as good, and the other wasn't. They set out to make the world livable for people, but they didn't work together. The good twin made animals that people could use. The other one made creatures meant to cause trouble. Hale wrote that he made serpents, panthers, wolves, bears, all oversized, and mosquitoes as large as turkeys. The good thing, he comes across the things that his brother has made. Hale wrote that he dealt with the snakes, the large animals, and the insects, but he didn't get rid of them. Instead, he made them smaller so that the people could handle them. In the Wikinuck story, the mosquitoes come off of the body of a cannibal spirit only to share its appetite for blood. There's another story from the southern Canadian Rockies where the very first mosquito is described as a full-on blood drinker, and this lines up sort of with the rest of the giant bug material that shows up elsewhere in Canada. In 1893, Charles Wake included a kootenai story that he had been told by a man named Paul in Tobacco Plains, Montana. Paul told it in the Upper Kootenai dialect on September 12, 1891. The first mosquito, Paul said, was traveling and saw at a distance a number of lodges. A voice said, "Come eat choke cherries." But the mosquito said, "I don't want to eat them." So the mosquito left and traveled on. By and by he came to another village, and a voice said, "Come, and you shall eat service berries." And the mosquito said, "I don't want to eat them." So he leaves and sets out again. And so he's going along and he sees another village, and a voice says, "Come, and you shall eat blood." This time, the mosquito goes up to the village, and he eats a whole lot of blood. His belly swells so much that at last, when he bumps up against a stick, it bursts and the mosquito dies. And from his belly came forth a myriad of mosquitoes, who all fly away. There's another story worth bringing in. Even though it isn't about giant mosquitoes, it's about the way mosquitoes were used on the northern plains. In 1860, the geologist Henry Yule Hind wrote about what he saw and heard during his 1857 and 1858 survey work along the Red, Assiniboine, and Saskatchewan rivers. He described a method of killing prisoners that Sioux warriors sometimes used in the summer on the prairies of Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Hind wrote that prisoners were sometimes stripped, tied to stakes behind a marsh, and left there. They couldn't move. And the mosquitoes did all the work. When fever and thirst set in, the person died with water at their feet and birds circling overhead. Two men who almost ended up this way were Joe Martin, who was half Sioux, and an Irishman named John Brown. Brown later picked up the name Kootenai Brown after settling on Waterton Lakes in Alberta. Fall of 1867, the two of them were carrying mail for the U.S. Army out of Fort Stephenson in Dakota Territory, where they were taken by a group of Sioux under Sitting Bull. This was 10 years before the Sitting Bull's famous fight with the U.S. Army. Brown wrote about the capture in his journey. He said Sitting Bull had got them off their horses and had stripped them down. Everything was taken from them. Some of the younger warriors started shouting to kill them. Sitting Bull told them to wait, saying that they'd make a fire and have some fun with the captives. Brown and Martin understood the language and knew what was being said about them. Sitting Bull took them to the edge of the coulee to question them. Martin scolded him for treating his own relatives so horrendously, claiming that Brown was also a Sioux half-breed. Sitting Bull, though, didn't buy it, pointing out Brown's blue eyes, but he did note that Brown spoke the language well and wore his hair long like a mixed descent of families on the plains. Sitting Bull asks them why they were helping the Long Knives, and they responded that they had taken jobs. Well, they were broke. While all of this is going on, the warriors have started arguing over who would get the horses. Brown and Martin used the distraction to roll down the coulee and into a lake that Brown would later call Strawberry Lake. The two men hid in the reeds while the warriors fired into the water. That night came, the warriors left, and the two men slipped away to Fort Stephenson. Brown wrote that when the sun came up, the mosquitoes found them. They were naked and the insects absolutely covered them. He said that there wasn't a spot on their body the size of a pinhead that hadn't been bitten. They reached Fort Stevenson later that day, barely ahead of the insects and the men who tried to kill them. Spiders and insects hold important roles in stories and teachings from many Indigenous nations in Canada. The Swampy Cree oral tradition, a giant spider called the Ehep, lowered the first person to earth on a strand of silk. Ojibwe and Algonquin communities, dream catchers, sometimes called net charms, are hung from cradle boards to protect infants. Their design comes from spider webs, and both spiders and their webs carry a meaning in those traditions. Insects have their own set of teachings. Many First Nations and Inuit communities use these to explain how the land works, how the people fit into it, how they move through it safely. Insects like these show up in stories about transformation, protection, and the balance of the natural world. Keeping these stories alive also keeps the language, teachings, and community history moving from one generation to the next. Butterflies are connected to change. They shift from caterpillar to adult, and this is connected to both physical and spiritual growth. In some communities, that change is also talked about with identity and the place of two-spirit people. Stories about mosquitoes explain why the insects bite and why they're so relentless. In one Pacific Northwest account, a giant blood drinker is burned, and the ashes turn into mosquitoes. It's a way of explaining where they came from and why they are everywhere in deep bog and swamp country. So maybe the next time a spider crosses your path, it's worth thinking twice before stepping on it. Thanks for joining me on this eerie journey through Canada's darker corners. If you love this episode of Canadian Creepies, be sure to follow Valerie on Instagram and TikTok at Canadian Creepies. She's the one behind the socials, sharing behind-the-scenes stories, creepy photos, and sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. And if you're craving even more haunted history and twisted folklore, be sure to check out my other podcast, Down the Crooked Path. You can follow the show on Instagram and TikTok for even more haunted history, mythical madness, and spine-tingling storytelling. Come say hi, share your own creepy encounters, and help us keep the weird alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay creepy.